My girlfriend loves to cause a scene. The night before our wedding, she got in a fight with me and disappeared without a word. Rumors flew around that she ran away from the wedding. Everyone said I was the one who got dumped. Her parents kept apologizing to me, racking their brains trying to fix things. They just kept saying they'd find her before the wedding. I turned them down. With everyone staring in shock, I pointed to a woman sitting in a wheelchair in the corner. That was my girlfriend's sister. Her mom passed away, and her dad ignored her. She was always quiet at home, almost invisible. I said, if she doesn't want to, then switch people. It's just a business marriage anyway. As soon as I said that, both families were stunned. Then there was a long silence. I noticed the woman in the wheelchair clench the blanket on her lap. Her pale hands were tense. She looked just as shocked to be brought into this. Our eyes met briefly, and she quickly looked away, lowering her head. She neither agreed nor disagreed. The first to speak up against it was Sophie's mom. Her expression was a bit twisted, a flash of resentment in her eyes when she looked at Emily, but she tried to please me when she faced me. Vincent, Sophie didn't mean it. She's just throwing a tantrum. You've known her for 3 years. You know how she is. The wedding is so close. Don't gamble your future on some anger. My parents didn't say much. They always let me take the lead on things. They sat on the sofa, almost like they were watching a show, playfully raising their eyebrows at me. I frowned. I know what kind of person Sophie is, which is why I said that. We've been together for 3 years. Being a bit older than her, and since she's been spoiled since childhood, she can be naive and childish. I didn't mind pampering her, but she grew more possessive over time and got more stubborn about things. She seemed convinced I'd always give in to her and wanted to test my limits. Sophie's used to being spoiled by her family and thinks the whole world should revolve around her. Even in a relationship, she thought her boyfriend should always be about her and nobody else mattered. At first, she wasn't like this. She was just a lively girl, always looking at me with hopeful eyes, awkwardly but bravely pursuing me. We started dating smoothly, but as time went on, her darker side showed up. Initially, I thought she was just a bit possessive. In relationships, stuff like that happens, and it can be kind of fun. But Sophie was good at pushing her limits. She sensed the way I indulged her and started to interfere more in my life. She didn't want me to have female friends. She had to tag along for outings. If I went out alone, she'd call within 30 minutes. She'd go nuts if she smelled someone else's perfume on me when I got home. She'd even pull stunts to punish me, like refusing to eat, running away, or sleeping in the car instead of the master bedroom. These punishments seemed silly. At first, I just went along with it to make her happy. But it got exhausting. The real frustration came from her relentless possessiveness and her attempts to have my world revolve solely around her. Her thoughts were naive and childlike, thinking that what's hers should belong to her completely. Her dramatic exit and runaway rumors were just to make me apologize, to shake me up. She might be wondering why she felt the only one insecure in the relationship, but I wasn't going to play these games. She could live forever in her princess castle, but I wouldn't be locked in there with her. The Millers and the Booths have had many projects together, and honestly, it's the Booths that caught a break with my family. But with so many years of cooperation, the ties are woven and not easily broken. Besides, Sophie and I dating made a family alliance look like the best outcome. Who knew it'd all fall apart right before the wedding? With rumors going wild, and with wedding plans and marriage news already out there, canceling would just confirm the gossips and bring my family even more unwanted chatter. I interrupted Sophie's mom. Ma'am, you know Sophie's character. She won't come back if I don't concede. Sophie's mom bit her lip. She kept looking at me, and I could almost read her mind. She wanted me to apologize and bring her back. For small tiffs, I would have coaxed Sophie, but blowing things up like this crossed a line. We were never meant to be. I shifted my attention to Emily in the wheelchair. She remained detached, as if I hadn't brought her up at all. I thought I should talk to her. Could we get a bit of privacy? I realized I didn't know her name halfway through. I'd only met her a few times through Sophie. At social gatherings, people referred to her as the wheelchair waist of the Booths. The Booths didn't care much for her either, so they never bothered to introduce us. Sophie's mom wasn't giving up easily, wanting to continue, but Sophie's dad shot her a warning look and said something to Emily. Emily remained expressionless, but her long lashes trembled slightly, hinting at her unease. I noticed her hair was a bit long, thick and layered, hanging around her face and hiding her features, making her seem gloomier. It seemed like every time I saw her at the booths, she looked like this. Sophie mentioned with nothing but disdain that she's useless, just staying in her room painting all day without speaking to anyone. She might just turn into a mute if she keeps that up. Once everyone left, I walked over to her and sat on the sofa beside her. She tilted her head slightly, as if glancing at me, but quickly looked away. Maybe she's still curious about me. The initial talk about swapping the marriage partner was partially me acting out of anger. Looking back, I didn't really consider how she felt. It seems like I've become another person who doesn't take her seriously, just like the booths. Before I could say anything, she spoke first. "Do you really want to marry me?" When she said that, her eyebrows furrowed, like she regretted being too quick to speak, looking a bit eager. I straightforwardly replied, "Sorry, what I said before was just out of anger." That seemed to hit her deeper than any of the dismissive comments I made earlier, making her upset. Emily took a deep breath, the hand holding her blanket trembling slightly. True, I was the one who initially talked about marrying her, and now I'm also the one saying it was just a spur-of-the-moment thing. It's like I'm playing games with her even more now. I composed myself and said, "I didn't mean to toy with you. I was impulsive before, but that doesn't mean I want to back out. We can marry, but only if you want to. I'm willing." Almost as soon as I finished speaking, she answered quickly, like if she delayed for even a second, I might take it back. Thinking about Sophie's father's demeanor before leaving, I couldn't help but add, "Is this really what you want?" Emily paused, a barely noticeable smile on her lips, nodding. Then, a trace of worry flickered in her eyes as she looked up, scrutinizing my expression. Once she saw I didn't have any other reactions, she seemed to relax. I could guess what she was thinking. She was probably wondering if following her own heart to agree to the marriage would make her look bad in my eyes, considering I was engaged to her sister before this. I've seen that kind of demeanor growing up and almost instantly knew Emily's thoughts. She likes me. When I took Emily out to try on wedding dresses, I realized she could stand. She noticed my frequent glances at her legs, her cheeks turning a bit rosy. "I've been fine for a while," she said. She had a car accident when she was young and has been in treatment ever since. Sophie's father gave up on her around that time. After all, he had another healthy daughter. Emily casually mentioned she's been fine for a while, and for a second I imagined a drama about pretending to be weak, waiting for a big comeback. But she just awkwardly said, "Walking got tiring. Sitting in a wheelchair with someone pushing just seemed easier, so I kept doing it." The booths didn't really pay attention to her, so they never noticed her wandering around, even running at home sometimes, still thinking she was disabled. Emily found the wheelchair to be a convenient means of transport and just kept up the facade. That gave me a new perspective on her. People initially assumed the wedding would go on as planned since I found her and brought her back. But at the actual wedding, everyone realized the bride had changed. All eyes were on me and the unfamiliar woman by my side, while the booths were shocked seeing Emily's legs. They probably felt like they were witnessing a miracle, a girl standing after being in a wheelchair for 10 years. My sister was the only one left in the dark. She couldn't believe it, asking if I was crazy for ditching Sophie and marrying a random stand-in. Can't blame her for thinking so. Emily wasn't well known. Many didn't even know the Booths had an older daughter. Half-sisters sometimes share resemblances. Judging by a few friends' expressions, they seemed to jump to the same conclusion. I gave them a quick explanation. My sister, dramatically pretending to weep in sympathy, said, "Poor Sophie. She's probably curled up somewhere like a kitten, waiting for her Prince Charming to ride in on a white horse and take her away, not knowing he's marrying someone else." She always exaggerated in her own way, and I was used to it. The ceremony went smoothly. My sister even bet me if someone would tell Sophie and have her come crash the wedding, given her sister was there. I bet against it and won a new car. Because I knew where Sophie was. She ran away to another country where there's a snowstorm, and flights are grounded for a week. Plus, the signal's iffy there, so even if they messaged her, she wouldn't get it right away. During the toasting, I brought Emily around familiar guests. She wasn't great at socializing, always trailing behind me, copying my moves. When I drank, she obediently raised her glass. When I called out, she echoed. Emily's vibe was different from my ex's, including Sophie. They weren't exactly obedient. Watching her quiet and well-behaved sight sparked a mischievous thought. I felt like teasing her a bit. I said, "Say cheers, this is my ex-girlfriend." Both their faces turned dark instantly. Emily stopped mid-toast, showing that confused look of wanting to be mad but not knowing how. I chuckled and reached for her hand. Her expression blanked for a second, but her anger quickly subsided. Was holding hands a sort of fire extinguisher for her? "Vincent, even though it was brief between us, you don't have to retaliate like this. You know I still like you. Acting like this really breaks my heart." Gloria pitched her dramatic act to turn my attention back to her. As soon as she finished, Emily gripped my hand tighter, then relaxed, holding it timidly, her palm a bit sweaty. I clinked glasses with Gloria and said, "Stop talking nonsense." Then I explained to Emily, "I was joking with you. She's Gloria, your sister's friend." I never dated Gloria. She's Sophie's close friend. Originally she was supposed to be in the bridal party, but with the bride switch, keeping the ex-bride's friends on made little sense. So the bridesmaids got swapped too. Gloria snorted, her expression slicing at Emily, embodying loyalty to her friend. "Sophie must be starving, waiting for you to fetch her home. Not knowing her spot got taken by someone new." She cryptically added, "Who runs off to a country mid-snowstorm to fetch anyone? Flights are grounded. Should I swim the Pacific? Did I make her pick such a remote place to elope? Let her ski back. Didn't you tell her?" I shot back. Gloria smirked, revealing a sharp canine making her look distinct. "Didn't say a thing. Thought I'd take advantage," she admitted. Based on an old glimpse of her chats with Sophie, I guess she coaxed Sophie into going abroad. Odds are, she spread the runaway tale herself. She aimed to swap spots with Sophie, bidding for marriage with me, but no dice, maybe a real blow to Sophie. Gloria gritted her teeth and said, "Do you think hitting her with her bad relationship with her half-sister isn't a big blow? Honestly, whoever I choose affects Sophie. Not picking her meant I wasn't into her. Funny thing is, I knew Gloria before I even met Sophie, and back then I had a girlfriend. Gloria tried to win me over for 3 years. When I finally broke up, I hit it off with her sister, driving Gloria nuts. She kept at it for another 3 years. With that kind of persistence, she could succeed at anything. And because of that relentless spirit, I never got with her. I mean, who knows how tough a breakup could be. The whole wedding was exhausting. I crashed in the hotel right after. After freshening up, I plopped onto the comfy bed, feeling sleepy. Emily was in the bathroom for ages, taking her time with what must have been her most thorough bath ever. She'd mentally prepped herself to come out, only to find me half asleep, with zero energy to appreciate some enchanting bath exit scene. The idea of seduction by beauty faded. Emily, a little disappointed, lowered her eyes but slowly walked over to the bed. I felt a shadow over me and opened my eyes to see Emily studying me closely. She didn't expect me to wake suddenly, and looked away in a slight panic. But she didn't move back an inch. She asked, "Tired?" I nodded, adjusting myself on the pillow. I'd been on my feet most of the day, and my legs were killing me. Emily asked, "Leg sore? I can give you a massage. Want one?" I glanced at her. Her eyes were clear. At least for now, she seemed genuine. Since arranging the marriage, we'd met like 4 or 5 times. Our first hand-hold was at the wedding, and we hadn't even hugged yet, let alone anything else. Now, right after getting hitched, it's just us in the room, and she's offering a foot massage? Like I'd believe there were no other intentions. I nodded and confidently shoved my foot into her lap. We're married now. Might as well make the most of it right away. Emily seriously kneaded my calves and ankles. Her technique wasn't top-notch but felt pretty nice. The more she massaged, the more awake I became. My legs felt less sore, but my heart was starting to race. Emily was in a thin nightgown, barely covering much. My leg rested on her lap, and I could feel her legs and sometimes her stomach through the fabric. I checked her out, imagining what her body looked like under that gown. I had no idea if she worked out at home, always assuming she was in a wheelchair or something. Talk about being invisible. Emily seemed to notice my gaze. It made her expression fluttery and her breathing pick up. I initially noticed she had pale skin. Sophie was different. She loved outdoor sports and had a permanent tan. I pulled my leg back, and Emily instinctively grabbed it, her hand resting on my ankle. She saw my teasing look and quickly pulled her hand back like she'd been shocked, hiding it behind her, running her fingers over a faint warmth left there. Sitting up, I moved closer. Her eyes fluttered, and her breathing grew deeper. I asked her, "Ever had a boyfriend before?" Emily replied, "Nope, always stayed home. Maybe my look was too intense." She stared back for a second but then looked away, blushing. Without thinking, I said, "So you don't know how to kiss then?" Emily half opened her mouth, and before she knew it, I had cupped her head and brought my lips to hers. She didn't know how to kiss, inexperienced and unsure of how to respond. I had control. Unless they're naturally gifted, most women I've kissed for the first time have a similar reaction, like Sophie. She started out just pressing against me, maybe a little lip nibble, but nothing more. But after more kisses, she grew into it, starting to challenge me for the lead on our lips. Emily's long hair was soft, the ends still damp. Petting it was like petting a cat. Our post-marriage life wasn't as awkward as I thought. It was actually quite harmonious, with a touch of warmth. The day after the wedding, I worked late at the office. When I finally got home, the lights were still on, and I could smell food cooking. That surprised me. She'd asked me before when I'd be home. Turns out she was planning a late-night snack. Sophie used to keep the lights on for me too, waiting up all night. But only because she was a night owl. She couldn't sleep without me, and when there were no games to play, she'd sit idly on the couch, waiting no matter how late. She never cooked. Getting her into the kitchen was a 911 situation. Backup just in case. Even if nothing caught fire, her cooking turned to charcoal anyway. I was shocked by Emily's cooking skills. Did she pick all this up under the booth's noses? At some point, Emily became a regular in the kitchen. I'd often see her bustling around in there. I never thought cooking mattered much. We could always hire someone. Quality wouldn't match a pro anyway. But seeing Emily in an apron, hustling around, it had a certain appeal, a kind of unexpected charm. Her lips were thin, corners turned down, giving an aloof air when not smiling. Her semi-long hair often hung down, shadowing her eyes, adding to the aloofness. But only I knew how soft she looked once I swept back that hair, holding her face, watching her gaze at me, spellbound. After a few days together, I noticed she'd subtly put herself in my line of sight. When I was tired from working in the study, I'd naturally look out the window. The view outside helped clear my mind. But now there was something new to see. Emily set up an easel in the yard. She had tied up her hair, rolled up her sleeves, exposing toned arms smeared with paint from mixing colors. She blended into the garden, colors on her palette growing, colors on her also growing. Dancing light and shadows turned her into an unforgettable picture of beauty. I can't stand being disturbed when I'm working. Neither Emily nor Sophie would bother me at that time. Sophie can be a bit childish. Sometimes, when I'm in the study too long, she'll sit by the door and scratch it now and then like a cat. It's quiet enough to ignore when I'm focused, but I always notice when I take a break. It's her way of making sure I remember not to neglect her for too long. Once I'm done with my work, I get up and open the door. Sophie sits there, pulling back her raised hand ready to scratch, and gives me a big smile. My thoughts get interrupted by the sound of Emily's paintbrush falling outside. I admit that after 3 years of being in love, it's hard to let go of Sophie completely. But time allows the old to leave and the new to enter. About 4 or 5 days later, Gloria, with a bit of schadenfreude, tells me that Sophie heard about my marriage to her half-sister. Even without flights, she'd probably find a way to ski back here. Gloria, lazily sitting across my desk, fiddles with her phone and says, "You better warn your new lover. Sophie's got quite the temper." Without looking up, I reply, "Don't talk about her like that. She's my wife now." Gloria's face turns sour, losing the amused smile she had. She looks at me expressionlessly. After a pause, she says, "You have a way of ruining my fun." Then, with a shift in tone, she laughs, but I kinda like it. Her bluntness makes me uncomfortable, and I don't say anything more, feeling like any response would just encourage her. When I got home that night, Emily was just as quiet and composed as ever. She made me a snack and took care of the laundry. She seemed pretty much the same as before, but I sensed something different. Probably because of the whole Sophie situation. Our wedding was public knowledge, just like my past one with Sophie. Though no one except Gloria would confront me, it wouldn't stop others from bothering Emily. I couldn't even imagine how many people came to her with their opinions that day. I knew Emily wouldn't say anything or probably felt she had no right to. Our wedding was almost like a farce from the beginning. Everyone said she'd taken her sister's place, stolen her sister's lover. If it were Sophie, she'd have flipped out already, causing a scene before I even got home, making it impossible for me to have a peaceful day. Afterward, she'd look at me accusingly for letting the gossip reach her, shed a few tears, then confidently deal with the busybodies. She's always been savvy about not getting the short end of the stick. Her schemes are so plentiful she'd definitely survive till the end in an ancient harem. But Emily's different. She didn't grow up being loved and doesn't openly express herself. This made her intriguing to me. My eyes fell on her tightly pressed lips and the way her lashes drooped while she worked. Her lashes are thick and long, almost hiding her thoughts. I couldn't see her emotions. I had an impulse to uncover her feelings and smooth back her hair to kiss her eyes. So I did just that. After all, isn't that what a wife's for? Emily was surprised, probably not expecting me to just act without warning. But then she awkwardly responded. When I pushed her onto the bed, I noticed her eyes unfocused, pupils shaking with the motion. Aware of my gaze, she shyly covered her face with her arm. Unable to see, she could feel everything else more intensely, swallowed uneasily, trying to quell the heat rising inside. I pulled her arm away. I rarely took control before, usually being polite. But on the bed, I'd let loose a bit. She felt as if I'd removed her last shield of propriety, her slightly open eyes wet, staring at me in the dim light. She looked captivating. I asked, "Is something on your mind?" Emily paused, maybe too overwhelmed to think, then softly said no. I said I'd get her to open up tonight. Controlling the pace of our kiss, Emily trembled, showing she wasn't used to it. Just one kiss left her defenseless, like a newbie facing a boss. I had Emily open up that night, not just physically, but emotionally too. She confessed the things she'd bottled up. "I don't want her back. They all say you were supposed to be with her, but we got married. I don't want to split up. Don't leave me." Her voice shook, teary eyes looking at me helplessly. "We may be married, but I don't know her as well as Sophie. She feels she has no right to be jealous." Since agreeing to marry, she knew the day would come that Sophie would return, and she'd have to face the fact that I might not like her as much. But she couldn't handle her emotions. No one can stay unaffected. She was madly jealous, hoping against hope that Sophie wouldn't make her flight, or the storm would last longer, or hope she'd face an avalanche skiing back. Just not death, because she'd never forgive herself for that. Better if she lives to see us happy. Before her tears reached her hairline, I wiped them away, leaning down to press a soft bite on her lips. "Don't worry. I'm not anyone's. You can be jealous," I told her. Emily's new to this, but surprisingly we're in sync. I didn't expect much from her before. I've had many relationships, and Sophie was extraordinary. It's hard for anyone to surpass her, which was a big reason why we got as far as marriage. But that night, Emily showed me more than I anticipated. Marriage isn't just about love. Sophie's young and fun-loving. She's got a million ways to have fun during downtime, always keeping things exciting. But that doesn't mean Emily can't give me something different. Maybe it's just a talent in her family or something. Whenever Emily speaks, it gives me this weirdly satisfying feeling. Maybe it's just my twisted mind, enjoying making her say or do outrageous things, watching her almost break down, then pulling her back from the edge and seeing her dazed look when she gets rewarded. It's a thrill Sophie can't really match. Emily, breathless and sweaty, once asked me if I was mad because she'd badmouthed Sophie a lot. I told her, "Why would I reward you if I were mad?" Her eyes brightened instantly, and she finally seemed at ease after a whole day of unrest. I let her feel jealous. She also realized I didn't care about Sophie as much as she thought. The day Sophie came back, it was Emily who heard first. She gave me a call right as I had just wrapped up a meeting and was heading to the next one. The Booths wanted her home for dinner, alone. Emily asked quietly, maybe hearing the noise around me, "Am I interrupting?" I told her no. Normally, the Booths wouldn't call her back home, even though she's marrying into their family for them. Unless absolutely necessary, Sophie's parents really don't want her around. So calling her back without me involved probably meant Sophie herself wanted it. After all the drama, I'd already blocked and deleted Sophie's contacts, so she couldn't reach me. She's clearly turned her sights on her sister now and isn't going to make life easy for her. Emily told me my sister's back. I said, if you don't want to go, just don't. You can refuse. Emily's voice dropped, sounding a little upset. They threatened to throw out my paintings if I didn't go, and I still have some things there. I could almost picture her looking down, annoyed. What's surprising is that she's learned to ask me for help now. When she first came home with me, she was like a brick wall, not making a sound. I checked my schedule and asked, what time do they want you there? I told her I couldn't leave just yet, but she should go first, and I'd pick her up after my meeting. I said she should pack all her important stuff this time. Her simple okay was much livelier compared to her earlier, more subdued tone, even had a rare girlish vibe to it. After hanging up, I saw all the missed calls and unread messages on my phone. Plus, there were friend requests. I could guess they were from Sophie without even trying. Messages like, why marry someone else? Why Emily? Do you know how I felt seeing your wedding news in that freezing cold? I felt colder than the ice itself. Everyone else knew about your new wedding. Why didn't anyone tell me? Are you mad? You married Emily just to spite me, didn't you? You were the one who started a fight with me, calling me immature. Why can't I be mad? Why do you get to be even angrier? I get it, you're not mad at me, are you? It's just because of those rumors about me eloping, isn't it? I'm back. I can explain. I didn't elope. I traveled alone without luggage. Why would I bring a guy? Makes no sense. Who spread that rumor anyway? Gloria suggested that place to me. It was -20 with blizzards. Who elopes to such a place? I really didn't run off with anyone. She still had her sense of humor. Maybe the blizzard blew away her last brain cell because she seemed more clueless after coming back. After handling everything, I drove to the booths. Their front door wasn't fully closed. Inside, I heard loud noises like something breaking and shouting that sounded familiar. Peering in, I saw Emily dragging a suitcase, alone against 3 people. Sophie's parents looked like they were interfering but weren't stopping Sophie much. I walked in and everyone froze. Sophie's hand on Emily's collar hesitated, then let go, her angry face shifting through a few emotions. There was surprise, a bit of hurt, and some anger. She looked at me wordlessly with dark eyes. The living room was a wreck. Emily looked rough, with a clear slap mark and a bit of a swollen lip. She had been all put together when she left in the morning, and now she looked pretty messed up. Embarrassed, she avoided my gaze and tightened her grip on the suitcase. I looked past everyone to Sophie's parents and coldly asked, "Did you call her back just to let your daughter take out her anger?" They were speechless. Sophie, in disbelief, asked, "You're helping her?" "Why?" "Because she's my lawful wife." I pulled Emily to my side, lightly touching the bruise on her lip. Just that gesture, and saying lawful wife, was enough to ignite Sophie's rage. "She's in my place," she yelled. "I was your girlfriend. I was supposed to marry you. She took what was originally mine. Why are you helping her?" "Sophie, you ran away," I reminded her, thinking her mind was still muddled. She kept fuming, defiantly saying, "I explained to you already. You made me mad first." I just wanted you to apologize, to prove you love me 100%. But you didn't. You ditched me without a second thought and got married to someone else. Someone you don't even know or like, and honestly, someone I can't stand. How can you expect me not to be mad? Sophie's face was flushed with anger, her features twisted, but her eyes shone with tears, almost pleading. When you walked in earlier, you didn't even look at me. You only saw that she was hurt and sided with her, not caring how I was doing after just coming back. Why wouldn't I be mad? I've said it before. Sophie is pretty immature. Her parents spoiled her, leaving her with this childlike honesty and selfishness even as an adult. Sure, she can manage her own life, be disciplined at times, and she's smart too. But when it comes to emotional needs, she's like a bottomless pit, constantly demanding more from others. She even tries to monopolize someone's life completely, wanting them 100% hers, letting no one else in. Disappearing right before the wedding, of course, only she would pull that off. Sophie let her anger loose without holding back, pouring out her frustrations and complaints, completely ignoring anyone else in the room. When she finished venting, tears spilled from her eyes as she looked at me. Her gaze and drooping eyebrows painted a picture of pity and grievance, like she was the one truly wronged. But honestly, everyone there spent half the day cleaning up the mess from her spontaneous runaway bride moment. People still talk about it over dinner. Emily was behind me, reaching to hold my hand. At first, she just held it lightly, but seeing I didn't reject it, she tightened her grip, hoping I'd see her and not get suckered in by Sophie again. I glanced back at her, and she gave me a bitter smile, clearly scared. I squeezed back. Sophie wiped her tears, catching us holding hands from the corner of her eye instead of seeing what she wanted on my face. Her expression changed instantly. Her anger, recently soothed, flared up again, worse than before. Sophie stepped forward to yank our hands apart, but I grabbed her wrist to stop her. She gritted her teeth. Why does she get to hold your hand, you? This is a new one. I used to know how to walk unscathed through these emotional minefields with her. Just had to keep her calm, and peace would reign. But now I'm protecting someone else, opposing Sophie. I need to figure out how to end this without a scratch. I said, Sophie, I'm married. The moment you bailed on the wedding, we were done. I stressed every word, watching Sophie's tears overflow, her defiance crumbling in an instant. Even her parents admit, I'm the only one who could calm her fits of rage. I just wanted to tell her that even without Emily, I wouldn't have married her. Sophie knew the runaway would tick me off, that doing it at that moment crossed a line for me. But she did it anyway, hoping to chip away at my boundaries, expecting me to lower them just for her, proving I loved her 100%. She's sharp and selfish, always knowing how to get the most out of people, to be loved the most. But she wasn't smart enough, didn't understand me well enough. She didn't realize that no one had ever crossed my line, not even after 10 years with a girlfriend. A mere 3 years were nothing. Liking someone doesn't mean you let them push you around. She only got it after losing me. As we drove back, Emily and I stayed silent. Honestly, I was left speechless by Sophie's antics. Feels like some villain from a soap opera, calling people over only to gang up with her parents to bully them. My thoughts drifted, Emily seeming like the flip version of a classic damsel in distress. Dad doesn't care, mom's gone, stepmom hates her, stepsister bullies her. Are you still mad? Came her timid voice from the passenger seat. I'd noticed her glancing sideways at me a while back, wondered how long she'd hold out before speaking. Not at you. Care to tell me what happened? Emily was quiet for a moment. Then she summed it up, leaving some parts out, testing the waters. It's like a curious cat sniffing cautiously before stepping out of its safe zone into your world. Keep asking and she'll flesh out the events, more boldly presenting the raw situation. I nudged her along, step by step, as Emily painted a fuller picture of what went down. How she faced cold shoulders at the booths, then got cornered by Sophie demanding a divorce. The booth's parents chiming in, saying she broke up Sophie's happiness, calling her heartless, telling her to step aside for Sophie. When she refused, not long after, someone laid hands on her while the booth's parents stood by, feigning concern with light words, showing little intent to help. Emily's telling me all of this, likely slipping in digs at Sophie as well. She's like a cat coaxed out of her hiding. Back home, after cleaning up, I placed a first aid kit by the bed and called Emily over for some ointment as she finished drying her hair. She approached cautiously, and when I didn't object, she took it as approval. She lay her injured cheek on my leg, her long hair prickling my skin. I gently brushed her hair aside, touching her cheek softly, pausing at her wounds. I whispered, "Does it still hurt?" The slap mark had faded, but it was still a bit swollen and red. Emily nodded, rubbing her cheek against my leg. I dabbed some ointment on my fingertips and gently applied it on her face. Her cheeks started to blush, even redder than when she'd come out of a steaming hot bath. Our skin felt hot where it touched. Even with the ointment, touching and rubbing the wound still hurt. Sophie was never one to hold back. But the pain came with a scent that made Emily's body feel hot and feverish, like she was truly under the weather. Emily knew where the scent came from, the body wash. They had just showered, and the fragrance was strong. Every time Emily visited the booths, she carried a scent, usually perfume. Sophie, too, always had a distinct smell when she came back. Back then, it seemed like they were in sync. But now, they used the same body wash and shared that scent. Even if she wore perfume in the morning, it would mingle with the smell of the body wash. She could never bear to let the scent fade, feeling as if she'd been marked by it. It was all over her. "Did you say something that made everyone mad at the booths?" I asked her suddenly, catching her off guard. Emily looked a bit startled. Sophie could be playful but usually didn't go too far, especially knowing I was coming. This seemed more like a momentary loss of temper. Emily nodded hesitantly and then said quietly, "You allowed it." I did allow it. Allowing her to express her jealousy and resentment meant that Sophie wasn't all that important to me. Emily had figured this out and didn't seem as vulnerable during confrontations with Sophie. She didn't physically fight back, but she sure had a lot to say. Things like "I'll be with him forever," and how Sophie could never have the same chance. Unless Emily made a serious mistake, they'd be legally married forever. Sophie was there to push for a divorce, not to hear a declaration of an unbreakable marriage. There was no way to put up with it. Emily wanted me to see how violent and selfish Sophie could be, to highlight her own gentleness. It was an old trick, but it worked because the opponent wasn't very smart. Even outdated, childish tactics worked. Emily knew she couldn't fool me with such tricks, and she never intended to. I didn't criticize her, which meant the tactic was okay, and Sophie failed to regain her footing. Sophie lost because she was greedy. Used to being loved fully, she wanted the same devotion from her partners. But he wasn't someone who fully invested in love, so she'd never get what she wanted. He was different. Having received little love growing up, a little affection filled his entire heart. I tucked Emily's hair behind her ear and gently stroked it to comfort her. "It's okay," I said. "You can be totally open with me." These words seemed to have a mesmerizing effect, taking Emily back years. He was in the car, watching Vincent in his school uniform. His face calm as he watched the wild stray cat. The cat, injured, had blood-streaked fur and was heavily guarding against humans. It hissed, its fur standing on end, but Vincent didn't seem scared. Instead, he reached out his hand, saying something to the cat. Unsurprisingly, he got scratched. Yet, he merely winced, showing no other reaction. The cat retreated, but Vincent patiently waited with a treat at the door. Occasionally, he'd move a little closer, then back off as if waiting for his chance. The cat, tempted by hunger, slowly crept out, sniffing before retreating and coming back again. Vincent's hand remained still, offering no further temptation. Once the cat was convinced it was safe, it limped forward for the food. Vincent slowly opened his palm, watching as the little cat climbed onto his hand, securing it so it couldn't escape. At that moment, he said something and ran his hand through the cat's chest, examining its wounds. The past and the present seemed to merge in her memory, the spoken words crossing time, landing on that scene years ago. Emily felt like that cat, once caught, never able to break free. After Sophie returned, gossip only grew. My sister hung around my office all the time, fishing for details about me and the two women in my life, even when holding her little kid. Once she couldn't pull any juice from me, she left her less than 1-year-old daughter on my desk and went off on her honeymoon, leaving me and baby Emma staring at each other, her little bottom atop my paperwork. Looking at Emma's innocent face reminded me of the fear my sister inspired in me. She'd dumped her daughter on me before, and back then, I foolishly thought I could reason with my sister. I called to ask if she'd forgotten her daughter, but the call didn't go through, signal issues, phone off, or unavailable. After the call dropped, she sent me a message. A little warmth for your newly formed family. When I got home from work carrying the child, Emily noticeably tensed. She froze, staring at Emma for a few seconds, before glancing at me with uncertainty in her eyes. I had a hunch she thought for a second that this kid might be my love child from some secret affair. Meeting her gaze, I explained helplessly, "It's my sister's kid. She went abroad for vacation." There was a flicker of something unnatural on Emily's face as she reached out to take Emma. I was about to stop her. I mean, this kid isn't usually friendly with strangers. One time, Sophie got scratched by her. As soon as anyone she didn't know held her, she'd wail. But to my surprise, Emma just stared at Emily. When she was first held, she resisted with a little cry, but a few seconds later she calmed down, quietly cuddled, and curiously watched Emily's long hair. Emily seemed to have a knack for handling kids. At first, she fumbled a bit. She looked up some guides online, and just like that, she was holding and soothing Emma like a pro. I barely had the time to put something away, and the two were already getting along swimmingly. Even at dinner, Emily was feeding Emma. Suddenly, taking care of the kid was no longer a headache for me. When my sister would drop the kid off, both Sophie and I were at a loss. Even with a nanny, it was hard, especially since Sophie didn't like kids, and Emma didn't like her. It was mutual disdain. Whenever I asked Sophie to hold the kid, I'd come back to find them sitting apart, not even making eye contact, both sporting expressions like they just smelled something bad. Sophie didn't just dislike kids. She equally disliked anyone getting close to me. Kids were just one category, and Emma was different. He's my sister's kid, and I adore him. With him around, it's hard to divide my attention elsewhere. Sophie has complained before that when the kid's here, I ignore her. She feels like the kid's stealing the love that should be hers. She insists she never wants kids. It makes sense in her world of logic and picky personality to repel what she sees as competition. But Emily's different. She seems to genuinely like kids and is great at caring for others. After watching a few online guides, she's a natural, handling it like she's run a daycare forever. There's probably a reason for it. Sophie grew up in comfort and love, never needing to learn how to care for anyone else, or even herself. Meanwhile, Emily had to fend for herself after her mom passed and her dad remarried. After my shower, I heard Emma giggling from the bedroom. Emily was playing with her toys. I stood by watching, arms crossed, before stepping forward. Was there room for me on the bed? Emily blushed a bit, shifted over, making a spot for me. I sat next to her. Emma handed me a toy, then grabbed another to give to Emily. I said, "Emma really likes you." Kids have this amazing ability to sense who likes them and who doesn't. That's why, no matter how hard Sophie tried to act the part, Emma still disliked her. When Sophie was around, Emma kept all the toys to herself. He'd cry if she even touched one, let alone hand one over willingly. Emily, blushing, said, "I like him too." You could see it, despite her hair being tugged at. She didn't say a word, instead slightly lowered her head, gently pinching his little hand and softly coaxing. Before long, Emma started to get sleepy. Emily took him in her arms, patting his back lightly, whispering to him. She had on a loose, light sleep shirt, her hair in a low ponytail lazily resting on her back with strands occasionally falling to the front. In the dim light, she bent slightly, holding the little one, her eyelashes and lips faintly curled, adding a soft glow to her otherwise cool features. I asked in a low voice, "Do you like kids a lot?" Emily paused, looked at me, and after a moment said, "I like them because of you." "Oh, so because Emma's my nephew, she likes him." Emily and Sophie both try to love by association, but their ways are quite different. Looking at her earnest profile, I felt this impulse to tease her, saying, "What if I don't like kids?" She was momentarily blank-faced. I continued, "Emma is my sister's, so I love him, but I wouldn't want my own." Though I was joking, it was honest. Emily was about to say it's okay and she didn't mind, but I interrupted. "But if it were yours, I'd definitely like that." I watched Emily's face turn beet red in an instant. She looked like she'd burst into flames from embarrassment. If it were Sophie, she'd probably frown and disgustedly declare she'd never have kids. No way would she let anyone interrupt her little world with me, not even a child. But Emily, after the initial shyness, actually seemed to begin considering it. I knocked lightly on her head. "You seriously want to have my kid?" She rubbed the spot, smiling. "It doesn't hurt. A little tingly though." I leaned in and gave her a quick kiss. "She's really adorable." Over the next few days, I realized Emily had seamlessly woven herself into my life. I found myself fully transitioning from Sophie's passionate, possessive love to something new. Sometimes I'd catch Emily and Emma on the surveillance feed, both sitting on the carpet. Sometimes she'd lull him to sleep with a story or a song, or make room for his impromptu artistry on her art book, finger painting her clothes. When he'd tire, she'd have the nanny take him for a bath. Every night coming home, I'd open the door to find a warm, harmonious scene in the living room. Hearing the door, both of them would look up, two pairs of bright eyes bringing instant joy, easing any of my stress. Emily would walk over with Emma, take my coat, and place the well-behaved little one in my arms. I guess I get why men enjoy having a wife and kids. If this is what life's like, I wouldn't mind more kids. After all, when they're well-behaved, kids are little angels, and when they're not, someone else can handle it. The phone rang. I glanced at the caller ID, handed Emma back to Emily, then stepped onto the balcony to take the call. "What's up with Uncle?" It was Sophie's dad. Even though both our families are in talks about a project, I doubt he's calling now about work. Sure enough, there was a short pause after he greeted me, probably figuring out how to start. If something gets this decisive person tongue-tied, it's likely about me and Sophie. "Here's the thing," he began. A familiar voice urgently chimed in. Let me, Dad, give me the phone." Of course, I knew whose voice it was. Sophie was sobbing, almost sniffling. "Vincent, I'm sick, really sick." I'd blocked her because she got on my nerves. I thought her silence meant she'd given up, but turns out she was just sick. Still, going alone to such a cold place, then finding out I'd switched grooms, coming back feeling all Jared, could have hit her hard. It's no wonder she's ill. Shouldn't you be calling a doctor? Not me? Please don't hang up. Let me just say a few things. I know I was wrong. I shouldn't have been so unreasonable. Sophie kept apologizing, spinning the same few phrases. She didn't actually think she was wrong. She just knew admitting it was her only shot at winning me back. "I really know I was wrong. Can you please take me off your block list? I don't expect you to forgive me. Just give me a way to contact you." She got smarter, knowing to take baby steps. "Please, I can't keep using my parents' phone to call. I promise I won't bug you." Her voice had that helpless, tearful tone, laced with a hint of charm. She always did this when I was mad. She knew I couldn't resist a pretty face, a nice figure, and that voice. Her voice filled my ears, but my eyes couldn't help drifting through the patio door to the scene inside. Emma was crying for some reason. Emily was pacing, trying to soothe her. Emma was on her shoulder, face flushed and wet with tears. "Vincent, I know my mistakes led to our breakup." As if noticing my gaze, Emma pointed at me, drawing Emily's eyes over too. Emily didn't want to interrupt my call, so she smiled helplessly through the glass, shaking Emma's tiny hand in a wave. "But those 3 years weren't fake. You know I love you, but now you're married to my sister. I have my pride. I won't ruin your family." Emma got upset when Emily didn't come over, her cries growing louder. Emily, struggling to calm her, hesitated, then tapped on the glass. I spoke as I opened the patio door. "Sophie, no need to try, you know it's not happening. Don't call again." My words were like final judgment. Sophie probably wanted to argue, but then came the sound of a child crying and a woman on the line before I hung up. Sorry. Emma kept crying for mommy. Maybe she's been away from her parents too long. Vincent, did I disturb you? No, come on in. The call cut off, replaced by the beep of a disconnected line. Those few lines were like a knife to her chest, straining all the mental threads until they snapped. Sophie, eyes red and face twisted, realized everything was screaming that the person she loved had moved on. Not long ago, her own selfishness led to her permanent abandonment. Finally getting Emma settled with a call to my sister, she quieted down. I noticed Emily unusually quiet since I hung up the phone. She got jealous, slyly though, just like when Sophie first got back. Emily was silently tidying up Emma's art supplies. Among the colorful scribbles Emma made, there were quick sketches of people in pastel highlights. Though rushed, they were complete. With just a few strokes, she animated static figures, making them lifelike. As I stared at the unfinished sketchbook, I noticed a drawing of me at a desk, the view outside the window sketched in rough lines. There were more underneath, all of me in casual moments, sometimes colored, sometimes not. Halfway through the book, every page captured unexpected glimpses of me. I turned to the first page, surprised at what I found. It was me in a school uniform, daydreaming by the window during class, hair blown by the breeze, lost in thought. She even detailed the school badge. There was a date, October 4th, 2016. Sophomore year, maybe? I sat half-perched on the desk, gazing at that drawing. Emily tiptoed over, probably to take it back, but I stopped her. She watched me anxiously, unsure what I thought. That phone call sparked a bit of insecurity. She wanted me to know she's known me for a while now, way before Sophie. You knew me before? I closed the sketchbook, curious about how often she'd seen me. Emily, standing freely, seemed cornered by my question. She nodded, raising her eyes and swallowing hard. When was that? I truly had no memory of Emily. In high school, apart from friends I still talked to, few left a mark, not even the girlfriends I briefly dated. One, but people you've met always leave a little mark in your memory. When I first saw Emily, she didn't seem familiar at all. She was good-looking, so you'd think I wouldn't forget meeting her. Emily said, September 14th, 2016, at 5:34 p.m., 500 meters from the school. Hold up. She nailed down the exact time and place without even hesitating, as if it was a reflex. It's like I've been reintroduced to a completely new Emily. I don't even remember what I was doing at that time. Maybe I was on my way home from school? Emily pressed her lips together before asking if I could join her in the art studio. I nodded. I'd never been to her studio before. I always thought someone's private space is just that, private. If she didn't invite me, I wasn't about to snoop around. As I stepped into Emily's studio, I realized just how big a secret she had been hiding right under my nose. Half of the paintings in the room were of me, each one bursting with vibrant colors, standing out among the darker-toned paintings, like sunlight piercing a dim room. They were all carefully cherished. I wondered if she knew I wouldn't poke around in her privacy, so she just displayed them openly. Emily pulled a sketchbook from a suitcase and handed it to me. I opened it, and the first page was a portrait, my ID photo. Fresh-faced, perhaps it was from a school honor wall after winning something, and she'd sketched it out, date marked in the bottom right corner. The second was me again, in my school uniform, crouching with a cat in my lap. There was also a little cartoon beside it, a cutesy doodle of a tiny character coaxing out the curious kitten. I stared at the painting and retrieved the memory. It was an injured kitten I found on the way home one day. Back then, I wasn't interested in owning pets. I took it to the vet and someone else adopted it. This picture's timestamp was before the ID photo, probably drawn from memory afterward. Flipping through felt like browsing an album of my youth. Every piece had its date. Sometimes Emily wrote notes around them. Stuff like how she wanted to know my name, my college plans, why I dated who I did, and when I'd break up. Looking through these sketches, I even remembered when I dated someone and when we broke up. The dating day painting was colorless. The breakup day was vivid, with an extra comic strip. Yet again, another one without color on the day we started. bursting with it the day it ended. It's like Emily had turned her drawings into a diary, painting her emotions. While I observed myself in these images, I also saw the diligent, young girl pouring her spirit into them. Her emotions were stirred easily by mine. The latest sketchbook began with her hearing of my engagement to Sophie. She drew a speculative wedding dress portrait of me, alongside obvious erasure marks on the other half. Emily shyly admitted that initially, she'd included Sophie with a phony sense of blessing, but couldn't bring herself to accept it fully, so she erased her, leaving only my solitary figure. Turning to the final page, it showed us both dressed for a wedding, me in a gown and her in a suit. I felt this inexplicable emotion, like a comic finally ending in a fairy tale finish. This time, she did draw Sophie. On a scrap paper, she sketched an exasperated version of herself unable to keep up with us, depicted cold and hungry in a desolate place. Gotta say, it's kind of hilarious how a good artist can turn a weak retaliation into interesting art. Through these pictures, I noticed an eager yet restrained soul beneath Emily's calm exterior. When I saw Sophie in the conference room, I wasn't surprised at all. She's not one to back down just because words might be harsh. This time, it was to discuss future collaborations between our companies, her mom present as well. When she caught my eye, she sighed, somewhat exasperated. It's obvious Sophie forced her to come. Sophie's a classic spoiled rich kid with no ambitions beyond having fun. She barely sets foot in their company's office and has no clue about business. She's only here with a proverbial knife to her mom's neck, making her do it. I didn't bother looking at her after that, focusing entirely on work. Sophie, however, fixated on me the whole time. Long meetings? She'd lay her head down and continue to stare, as if I'd vanish if she looked away. Whenever our eyes met, she'd light up, her hypothetical tail wagging behind her like a propeller. When I spoke, she nodded along no matter what, eyes filled with awe. Okay, I admit, one reason I used to like her was that admiration. Everyone has some vanity, right? When negotiations got rough, Sophie pinched her mom's leg, throwing her whole argument off as her mom turned pale, almost losing her cool in front of everyone. The room stayed silent, observing. They all knew about Sophie and me, and the crazy stuff that went down between us. The air was thick with tension and gossip. Even the secretary kept using tea as an excuse to float in and out. Sophie's mom grumbled at her to behave. Sophie replied, "Mom, if she wants it, give it to her." Her mom countered, "You even know what it is? We're not talking a few dollars here, and it's not your money to give." After the meeting ended, I saw Sophie's mom pulling at Sophie's sleeve, saying something. Sophie rolled her eyes, yanking her sleeve back defiantly, standing her ground. Her mom, looking like she wished she could turn back time and re-raise her, sighed heavily. When Sophie saw me, her annoyed look melted into a grin. Her mom turned, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, and said flatly, "Vincent, I have some things to do later. Could you take her home?" As soon as she finished speaking, she turned around and ran off before I could even respond. Her mom didn't even bother with the elevator for her daughter's sake. She took the stairs. The secretary glanced at Sophie, then at me, probably thinking about that bride-to-be I'd never even met. Was she here to play the third wheel? I took her into my office, because talking outside would just fuel company gossip, and I'm not feeling charitable enough for that right now. What's she here for? Sophie opened her mouth but didn't say anything for a few seconds, like she had the words but couldn't start. Finally, she nervously said, "You still haven't removed me from your blocked list. That's what she came all this way for? And sat through that painfully boring meeting too?" I unblocked her right in front of her and looked at Sophie. She had no more reason to stick around. Sophie was internally fuming, knowing that was one reason she came. Even though I unblocked her so easily, my indifferent attitude stung more than if I had tried to cut ties with her completely. It was like I moved on from our past so quickly. Her presence didn't bother me at all anymore. She said, "I have other things to tell you. I ran away to the place you always wanted to go. You said you wanted to ski there, and I thought I'd get there first and wait for you to find me. It would have been the most romantic and unique wedding. If not for the snowstorm, I had even found a place to set up the wedding. But she was the kind of spoiled princess who didn't bother checking the weather, oblivious to the snowstorm, just because I once mentioned wanting to ski and see the northern lights there. She was only mad in places I wanted to go. I know I messed up, Sophie continued, her eyes gradually welling up with tears. Will you give me another chance? The tears began to overflow. Maybe she didn't realize that this wasn't her first time being this way, but from where I stood, her behavior was more than just a one-time tantrum. What kind of chance are you asking for, Sophie? I'm already married, I told her. You can divorce, she blurted out, then quickly added, before my expression could fully register, you don't have to. Just keep me around. As long as I'm with you, it doesn't matter when you spend time with me. We don't have to divorce. I don't care about all those messy relationship titles. Was my ex-girlfriend seriously offering to be the other woman? Alright, she brought this on herself. I couldn't help but accept her outlandish suggestion for a moment. Sophie was always a bit off. I figured she'd been spoiled to the point of being self-centered, oblivious to others' needs. And knowing her, if I ever let her into some shady relationship, she'd flaunt being the mistress to the world. She'd fight hard to be seen, brutally stepping over Emily, my lawful wife. In the end, she'd be the mistress, but I'd be the one embarrassed. Calm down, Sophie. Think about your parents. They're getting old, and they'll be wrecked by your antics. But Sophie stubbornly replied, I don't care about them. I only want you. Even though I'd blocked her, she found ways to keep tabs on me and Emily. She even added Emily's contact, and Emily didn't reject it either. She saw Emily's posts and tortured herself watching the sweet, cozy moments. I'd help Emily cook, prepare salads, and do little things for her. Those moments should have been hers. That shrimp should have been in her mouth. They'd even taken wedding photos. If Emily hadn't snuck in while Sophie was away and taken advantage of the situation, none of this would have happened. Sophie's voice trembled. Do you like someone like Emily? I'll try my best to like kids. I'll learn to cook, and I can stay home with kids and wait for you. I'll be whoever you want. I have no doubt at all. The pity in her words dripped with desperation. If I agreed now, there'd be a sudden convenient widowing, and in 3 days she'd move in. Believe me, she would. So I turned her down. Just as I was about to open the door to let her out, I was met with her mom's eyes outside the door. She pretended to be gazing at the scenery, her wandering eyes eventually landing back on me. Acting surprised, I opened the door. She quickly noticed her helpless daughter sobbing inside, a woman in her 20s losing it. If she knew, she'd have left and not come back. Good timing, I said. Auntie, now that you're back, please take her with you. We finished our talk. Sophie's mom nodded awkwardly and reached for Sophie. Sophie cried, Mom, Vincent doesn't want me anymore. I don't have a home. Sophie's mom replied, And what about your dad and I? Are we just the neighbors? The elevator doors opened, and Emily stood there, a little girl with pigtails in her arms. Surprised by the scene, she looked at me, calm and unbothered. Did I come at a bad time, Vincent? You busy? Sophie abruptly stopped crying, still wet-eyed but glaring daggers at Emily, as if she wanted to peel a layer of her skin off. I told Emily to wait a minute. We'd planned to go out for dinner that evening. Emily nodded. Emma missed you. I asked the driver to bring her. Didn't expect Mom and Sis would be here. Who's your sister? Sophie snapped, like a cat on edge, nearly dragging her mom holding her sleeve. I rubbed my forehead. Enough. Let's stop this here. I quickly asked my secretary to help Sophie's mom take her away. The secretary was practically overwhelmed, probably wishing her eyes could see everything at once. This drama was too good to miss. Even as I caught her eyes widening, I knew the office gossip would inevitably increase. Whatever, we'll call it a company perk. On the drive to the restaurant, Emily remained mostly quiet, interacting with Emma the only time she spoke. While eating, I recounted the chaos Sophie brought, conveniently leaving out her offer to be the third wheel. Emily visibly lightened up, then smirked. So me provoking Sophie like that won't make you mad? I winked at her. I don't mind, why would I be mad? Emily smiled, knowing I wouldn't be angry. Every time she asked, She felt reassured by my answers, leaving her with a sense of deep fulfillment she couldn't quite describe. Happiness really did land in her hands.